let's replace the shock and strut assembly on a Ford Taurus 2003 3.0 liter. Loosen your lug nuts, and off comes our tire. And now this is where the fun begins. We're going to loosen up our little sport bar here with a 19mm box end and a 8mm socket. And just like that, we'll let the 19mm lock itself up on the frame. Next, we're going to loosen the brake line mount with this 10mm bolt right here, just like that. And out comes your 10mm bolt. Now we're going to unbend the cotter pin for the control arm. And out comes our cotter pin. Now we're able to loosen our control arm nut, so 11/16. Now I'm going to move on to the main pin bolt here for the shock. I know these can be quite tricky, so I have a few tricks up my sleeve for you guys. So I did drench it in penetrating oil and let it sit for a couple days, but we're going to start with this main nut first. It's a 13/16, and we'll crack that loose first. So I left the nut on the end of the bolt for a very specific reason. So when we tap this, we won't go up the end of the threads. We'll give this a good couple whacks, and if this doesn't move, we'll move on to the fire. So this one was a lot easier than the one I did yesterday on the passenger side. It's already moved, as you can see, but I will show you a couple tricks just in case you can't get yours off. Trick number one is obviously fire. Heat up all around the bolt, and that usually does the trick to break up all the loose rust that's trapped within there. If you still can't get this bolt loose even after fire, I have one more trick, and this involves a pry bar. You stick it on this locking tab. Most of them usually have the locking tab on there, and then you just give it a couple whacks that way, and it usually breaks up all the rust on the interior of the threads of the bolt. You give it another tap on the other side with your mallet, and then that usually does the trick to make it slide out. Now we can take our nut fully off, and we'll just tap it the rest of the way out. And out comes your main bolt. So now we're going to spray with penetrating lubricant all around the face here so it'll slide out nice and easy. Let's give the hub a good few taps just to loosen things up. Next, we're going to take our mount point off back here. This wrench is a 13/16 and the socket is a 3/4. Let our wrench lock in place and we're good to go. And out comes our bolt. So since everyone loves to do things quickly, I grabbed a crowbar, I wedged it in a pinch point up there. I'm going to pull up on this shock as I hammer down on the hub to get this shock out. As you can see light through there, so we're at the end of it. And as always, keep a close eye on your brake line. Alright, after my little way of cheating the system, we just crank loose our shock mount with the bolts with a 13mm socket. And off comes your nut. So with the new kit, it comes with new bolts. So these old ones, we don't need them, so you can throw them away. Back down below, our shock should just pull out just like that. Out comes your entire assembly. Again, always stay conscious of your brake line so there's no tension on it. And that's what the mess looks like without a shock. Now, the one good thing about worn shocks is disassembly. You can actually use a crowbar to compress this to get it out easier. So this new one is going to be a different story though. Make sure you throw your new nuts in a location where you won't lose them. So same story. We're going to lube this up nice and good. And we're going to spray this inner well as well. So now this is the really fun part. We're going to stick the top of this shock up into the well first. And then we're going to angle this and try and shimmy it in. But before we do anything, we're going to throw on all three of our locking nuts. This is the entire reason why we loosened this pinch point here. So we can push the hub down, angle the shock around to the front, and then you pry it up with a crowbar very gently, always keeping track of your brake line. It'll pop into place on an angle just like that. So now we just shimmy it into place. Then make sure you're aligned back here with your bolt tab. So what we can do now is simply lift on the bottom of the hub so it seats into place just like that. Get our crowbar out of there. Again, now we just work it back into place. Just simply put the jack underneath the hub so our bolt tab is aligned with the groove. Now we just jack it up into place. Just like that. It slowly disappears. Now for the sake of it, I am going to throw some anti-seize on this since these love to seize and break. Now we're set to throw our bolt back in. Give it a few love taps. Now we're good to throw our nut back on the other side. Next we toss our stabilizer link back in, which I already did. You may need a jack to hoist it up until you meet up with the hole. Then you throw your nut on and start cranking her down. Let the 19mm wrench lock itself up. Work smarter, not harder. Give it one good crank and that'll be it. You don't want to overdo it because remember the steering link is plastic, so it is prone to cracking. So to get this little pinch point back into place, it's a little tricky, but what I can recommend, set your jack to hoist up the pinch point here, turn your hub to the right. Now it's a very quick process and it will jump very quickly, so watch your hands, hit here, it'll jump back into place. So set your curl bar up underneath the pinch point so you can lift this pinch point up so you can slide your bolt in. And it doesn't take a lot of force to lift it up with the curl bar. Bolt slides right in, and you just tap her on. Take your 15/16 wrench, and your 3/4 socket, and crank her on down. Let the wrench do the work. Now, just so we don't damage anything real quick, I'm just gonna hook this brake line back up with our little 10mm bolt. This little 10mm bolt for the brake line is a self-tapping hole on new assemblies, so just make sure you go in straight and don't over crank it because they do break. Quick little fun fact, this little bleeder valve for the brake fluid, now unfortunately for these model cars, they don't have them. They're technically called Zerks. We do also call them grease fittings. They look just like the bleeder valve for the brakes. They usually sit on top of these steering knuckles and you fill them with grease with a grease gun, but this does not have it, so I am gonna load this up with anti-seize. Now that we got it loaded up with anti-seize, now I just stick our steering knuckle back to how it was. Boom, done. Throw your castle nut on. Make sure you hammer your little cotter pin back in. And finally, last but not least, crank your little 13mm back down up top. Remember not to over tighten these. A 1/4 inch crank is about all you need. How to install a tire 101. Anti-seize. Install your tire. Reinstall your lugs. Tighten your lugs. Remove your jack stand. Lower your beast. And finally, torque your lug nuts. And there you have it. Other side was already done yesterday, so she is good to go. Thanks for watching.